In this lecture, we'll take a look at mapping. Specifically, we'll take a look at the following. We'll look at mapping options Tableau Desktop offers straight out of the box, as well as the custom mapping options that you can define in addition to the ones you get. You may have already noticed, but certain fields in the data window appear with the following little icon, which is a little globe. So things like postal code, state, province, and the city are all already identified as geocoded type fields. What this means is that these types of fields can be mapped in a Tableau chart. You can actually see, if you go to Tableau Online documentation, you can see a full list of different fields and roles and how they're applicable to your country. Generally, it's US focused, but some of the other countries are also covered as well. So to build a map view, we can simply double click on the geocoded dimension. So state or province is a geocoded dimension, so double click on that creates a map view. So what it's done, it's actually moved state or province to a mark. So these marks are actually states. And it's also, with each of the geocoded fields, we have a corresponding latitude and longitude, which are generated, and it moved those to column and row. So it basically, you can think of it as an intersection of those two is where the mark is drawn. Now there's actually two types of maps we can use within Tableau. If you go to show me, you can actually see them. So there's a symbol map, so one that actually has marks as points on the map, and the other one is actually a field map. So if we switch that over, it actually draws a polygon around a particular mark. So with the field map, we can do things like move profit into color, for example, and we'll actually color different marks. Now there are a number of things you can actually adjust with your map. So up on the top menu, we can go to the map and go to map options, which brings up the map menu. So we can actually change the background. Let's make it a bit more dramatic, and you can change the washout. So this is, you're basically formatting the map. Again, using marks, you can further format your map view. So we can actually, let's get rid of this, and we can drag state name onto the label, just in case we don't know which state is which. And we can also drag things like actual profit. So we can now see the profits. Let's quickly just change profit to be a currency. So in addition to change the style, through map options, we can actually also include different layers. Now this little pop-up here is actually a navigation. It allows you to navigate through the map, so we can zoom in and zoom out, or we can have a controlled zoom. So maybe if we want to look at California only, we can do it through this little icon. So let's have a look at the more detail level, and let's maybe have a look at the actual cities. So just double clicking on that, we get a message that field maps are not available for cities. So certain roles can be displayed as areas, certain roles can't. So city, in this case, it's just a dot on the map, it's not an area. So at the moment we're just using a symbol map. Okay, so these are all different cities showing the sum of profits. What we can do, we can actually drag something like sales onto the size and get a different size based on the total value of sales. And we can also change the color and make it going from red to green. Okay, now we can see that mostly it's red, but we have some green in California, so we can use the little focus tool to get into it and see where it is happening. The other thing you can show on the map is a different map layer. So at the moment, some things are switched on. We can include things like streets and highways, different counties, different borders, and so on. Again, it's focused mainly on US maps, but one thing you can actually do is define where you're actually getting the underlying map image information from. So at the moment, we're connecting to Tableau, but you can create your own WMS server or connect to one of the existing ones. So here I've actually found one, University of Heidelberg, and you need to specify URL. So we can actually, in this case, actually switch over. I can switch my background map to use maps served up by this server. And in this case, if I do that, I get a slightly different map. Now, with WMS servers, as I say, you can build your own, which is quite complex, or you can use one of the ones on the internet. Generally, the ones on the internet are quite specific to particular industry or particular landmarks they're showing or subject areas that are showing. So it depends on the requirements. You may or may not be able to use one of the other ones. Now, if your data contains one of the compatible geographic roles listed above, but Tableau doesn't at first recognize it as a geocoded dimension, you can always override it by changing the geographic role manually. So to do that, you need to find that particular field in your dimensions. So let's say region, we know it's actually a geo coded type field, but at the moment it's just being brought in a string. And what you can do is actually change its geographic role in the little context. So now, if Tableau doesn't support the geographic role in your dataset out of the box, then the good news is that Tableau offers you a relatively easy way to perform custom coding. The bad news is that in order for the custom coding to work, you must have the exact latitude and longitude coordinates for each of the locations you wish to geocode. So it's not a big deal if you're doing a few dozen, but it can become quite a large task if you're wanting to, say, geocode street addresses in your sample of 10,000 customers or 100,000 customers. So the first step in this process is to actually create a comma-separated values file containing each of the landmarks to geocode, stored in a single column, as well as the latitude and longitude columns. It should look something like the following. Okay, so once we have a file like this, let's see how we would use it in our workbook to do custom geocoding. So in this workbook here, we're showing total number of visitors between 2011 and 2014 to some of the very famous landmarks in Australia. So now in this file called landmark visitors, we have a field called landmark, which we use to draw our chart. But we can see that the landmark at the moment, it's only a string type field. It's got a little ABC icon next to it. The landmark is not one of the default geocoded fields that Tableau provides out of the box. We can see that if you look at the geographic role, there's no such thing as landmark. So in this case, what we need to do is do our own custom geocoding. So we prepared the file, we know where these landmarks are. So in order to use that file in a workbook, we will go to Map and go to Geocoding and import custom geocoding option, which will prompt us to specify where the files are. Now here you will be specifying the directory, not the actual file itself, because you can break up your custom geocoding information in a number of different files. So now that my file is sitting in map sources directory, it's right there, mylandmarks.csv. So I'll select that folder or that directory and I'll click on import. So Tableau will now import the data, geocoded data into the workbook. Now this may take a bit of time depending on the size of your file and number of points you have. Even this one, which is very simple, it's got only 5 landmarks, it still takes a little bit of time. Okay, so once Tableau is finished what it needs to do, we can go to our landmark field and we can change its default or change its geographic role to be landmark. So we can see landmark is now an option for geocoding. So selecting that, we can see the little icon has changed to landmark is now a geocoded field, which means we can actually use it to put it on a map. So let's do that. So we'll go to sheet 2, and just by double-clicking landmark, it actually knows that it's, because it's geocoded, that it actually should by default display it on a map, and that's what it's done. So let's see which landmarks are which. We can put more information on label, and maybe we'll change the size of each of the dots based on the number of visitors, and maybe to make it a little bit more obvious, we can make it bigger, and maybe the visitors can also change the color of each dot, and instead of using just a green, maybe we'll do red to blue. And with this, you can now see your landmarks drawn on a map using custom geocoded file. Using this option, in addition to creating your own custom geocoded rows, you can also extend existing ones. So, for example, we can actually provide a file that extends the existing state and city hierarchy and roles. So if we're not in the US and we're in some other country, we can actually add our own geocoded values to the ones that are preset by Tableau. So one last thing to note is that in addition to custom coding simple points, you can actually define your own polygons to be used in Tableau. The file you provide to Tableau is similar to what we have seen before, but in addition, it simply has a sequence number which indicates how the path should be drawn for a specific polygon. This allows you to create your own regions and areas on the charts. One thing to be careful of is that the more points you define for your polygon, the bigger the file will get and the slower the rendering of the maps will get. So try and balance the detail with functionality.